So looking at the plant cell, obviously, as we've said over the last couple of days, they have a lot of structures in common. Okay, more so than they have different. So we'll just we'll start here, okay, and we'll go clockwise around. So this orange sausage-shaped thing, you want to remember what it was in the animal cell? Everyone flips over their sheet to look it up. Mitochondria, right? Okay. Now the mitochondria, guys, carries out cellular respiration. That is, it burns sugar and releases the energy in sugar so that the cell can carry out energy requiring functions. All right, so that's what the mitochondria do, and that's why they're in both plant and animal cells. Okay, both plants and animals use sugar as a source of chemical energy. How they get that sugar is different, but that's what they both use. All right, so the mitochondria are pretty important. Okay, the mitochondria also get kind of hot. After all, there's essentially a combustion reaction going on inside of them all the time. Okay, they're what provides a lot of the heat your body puts off. All right, so if you're exercising, these things are working harder. You get hot, you sweat in order to cool down because your body needs to run at a certain temperature. If you get sick, okay, you get an infection of some kind, you usually run a fever. That means that your body is signaled for these things to run hotter than usual. Okay, it's burning more sugar than usual and driving your body temperature up and preventing your sweating reflex from happening, allowing your temperature to go up. What's the purpose of a fever? Why does your body do that? Yeah, okay. Most bacteria that would make you sick, they're like the temperature your body is at normally. So 36.8, 37 degrees, something like that. Okay, they like that temperature. If you get a fever, then those bacteria don't work nearly as well. Okay, a lot of their biological functions just stop, even 2 or 3 degrees normal or higher than normal. Now, 2 or 3 degrees higher than normal for you is also not good because your body's chemical functions are supposed to happen at 37 degrees. And if your body is running a fever for too long or too high a fever, okay, that can be deadly. All right. And has anyone ever gotten a fever where they were like delirious? Okay, yeah, like you get a fever, you get over like 42, you could die. Okay, like that's pretty serious if your body's even 5 degrees hotter than normal. All right, so you definitely want to avoid that. Okay, the little dots. Some of them are here, okay, kind of by themselves, and some of them are over here on this stuff. What were the little dots? Ribosomes. Okay, and ribosomes make protein. Right? That is their sole purpose. They take that information that the nucleolus sends out, okay, the RNA, that's the set of instructions for making something, they make it. Right? And that's why they're generally close to the nucleus here on the rough ER, okay, but sometimes they're spread out throughout the cell as well. All right. These labels here I cut off, but these are basically just types of part of the cytoskeleton again, but there's not much cytoskeleton in a plant cell, which is why I've cut those off. We're not even going to label those. Okay. The big green thing. What do we say? If only plant cells have it. Chloroplast. Okay, so chloroplast carries out photosynthesis. Okay, we talked about that when we talked about modes of nutrition. This is one of the things that is only present in the plant cell. Okay, it's not in an animal cell. All right, so the chloroplast carries out photosynthesis. That is its sole job. Okay, these little holes right here that are in both the cell wall and the cell membrane are called plasmodesmata. They essentially allow the cytoplasm of many plant cells to be connected. Okay, which means that if one plant cell has lots of something in it and the other one doesn't have very much, it would naturally move by diffusion through the plasmodesmata and into the other cell. Okay, it's just a way that kind of enhances transportation. I don't remember the last time I ever asked anyone to label that one. It's just somebody always asks, what's that stuff? I'm never going to ask you what it is, but it's on there. Okay. All right, this orange thing gets rid of wastes. Has kind of a technical sounding name. Starts with G. Golgi Apparatus, right? All right, so with the Golgi apparatus, how it works is it actually has two sides, right? It has a cis face and a trans face, or a receiving and shipping side, okay? So one side receives the waste products from the cell, okay? As those waste products pass through the Golgi, they get put into a bubble called a vesicle, okay? It's essentially a piece of membrane. It's like a cell membrane, but it wraps the waste product in this membrane. Okay? That way, that waste product can't come into contact with any other part of the cell and damage it. That vesicle will leave from the other side, the trans face or the shipping side, okay, of the Golgi apparatus, and it'll move towards the membrane. Since that vesicle is made of exactly the same material as the membrane, once they hit, they just merge. Okay? They merge, and essentially the vesicle pops, and the material goes out. All right, everyone kind of follow me there? All right, they cut away the orange thing here so you could see behind it. What is this stuff? Or what is this thing here? Kind of goes all the way around. Cell membrane. Okay, that's our cell membrane. Okay, and Science 10 level explanation of what the cell membrane does. It carries out endocytosis and exocytosis. Okay, that is, it controls the movement of materials in and out of the cell. The technical terms for that are endocytosis and exocytosis. Right, so pretty important job. It's essentially like the border crossing. Okay, it makes sure that bad stuff doesn't get into the country. It's the wall. Yeah, you can all have a little chuckle about that. And it's going on YouTube because it's a joke. Anyway, the thing outside of that for a plant cell is cell wall, right? Okay, remember, animal cells don't have that because it would make them too rigid and the animal wouldn't be able to move. Okay, for a plant, that rigidity is important. It needs to be able to support all of the weight of its photosynthetic parts, its leaves and branches and things like that. Okay, now, again, the cell wall is never diagrammed correctly, at least in my opinion. It is not a barrier like this. It's a frame. Okay, it's a frame. It's got holes in it, right? But it's supportive. It just doesn't seal in the cell like it does in every diagram that you see. Right? It's actually made up of fibers, and we talked about those the other day. It's kind of a crisscrossing type of fiber. It would almost look like if you looked at like denim or something like that under a microscope, and you'd be able to see the crisscrossing threads. That's what this would look like. Okay, so it's a frame, okay, made of these interlocking fibers, but stuff can get through it. Okay. All right, this one here I want you to just cross off because it's just a small vacuole. Okay, we'll label the big one. All right, this stuff here, the blue stuff that's kind of squiggly and goes everywhere. Smooth ER. Right? The smooth ER actually fills up a lot of the cell's volume, but because it's smooth, it's hard to see under a microscope. Okay? Especially a light microscope, it's really hard to see under a light microscope. So it's probably not something you would be able to see or label when you look at a cell. Okay, but like we said, it has lots of important jobs. Okay, it detoxifies poisons. Right, so essentially, it's like the liver of the cell. In fact, the cells in your liver have more smooth ER than anything else, right? Because your liver's job is to clean toxins from your blood, right? And we consume toxic stuff all the time, hopefully not on purpose, but okay, we do consume some things that are toxic, or our body produces things that are toxic, like lactic acid and stuff like that. That all has to be broken down, okay? If you were to consume, let's say, like alcohol, for example, okay, the smooth ER is the organelle that is responsible for metabolizing that and breaking it down into something else. Now, does it mean that what it breaks it down into isn't harmful? No. That stuff it breaks it down into is just able to get out of your body. Does it make you sick? Yes. Does it give you a headache? Yes. Okay. It does all of that stuff. Okay. But that's because you drank a toxin. Alcohol is toxic. Okay. That's why it does the things it does to you. Okay. Nicotine, other drugs, same thing. Okay. They all have the same effect on your body. Okay. Your liver, your smooth ER has to break that stuff down into things that your body can excrete. The only place your liver can put those things to be excreted, well, it can go into your urine, but the kidneys have to deal with that, okay? But you often feel nauseous, and that's because it's trying to get that stuff out through your intestines, okay? And so it irritates your your digestive tract and sometimes makes you throw up. Okay, this stuff here with all the dots on it, rough ER. Okay, the rough ER's job is just to transport proteins. Okay, the smooth ER, like I said, I only named one job there, but it does a lot of other jobs. The other jobs it does is that it repairs membranes, okay, because it makes fats, and that's essentially what your membrane's made out of. It breaks down complex carbohydrates. So if you had like a big old plate of spaghetti or rice or something like that, okay, that's high in starch, okay, or lots of potatoes, okay, it's high in starch, then the smooth ER has the stuff that breaks that down into glucose that your mitochondria can metabolize. Okay, okay. The rough ER though just transports protein. Okay, it does have a little bit to do with hormone production, but that's mostly because hormones are proteins and they're made by the ribosomes that are on there. Okay. All right, the big dot in the middle here, this thing here, is the nucleolus. All right, so that's the part of the cell that regulates protein synthesis. It's the part that goes and finds the part of your DNA that tells your cell how to make something, so it can go out and look for that, okay, and send those instructions to the ribosomes. It's the librarian, okay, that knows where all the information is. Okay, and then okay, the big thing in the middle is the nucleus. Again, those two have to be spelled correctly if they are on a test or quiz. I mean, they should all be spelled correctly, but those two especially because they can be confused with each other. What's the nucleus do? Stores the DNA. That's all it does. Okay, it is a storehouse for all of the genetic material in your cell. It is not a brain. I think we had that discussion the other day. Don't write brain. Okay. The outside of the nucleus is the nuclear membrane. Okay, and that is a special double-layered membrane that makes sure nothing but DNA gets into the nucleus. Okay? We don't want anything but DNA to get into the nucleus because the DNA is so important. Okay? We don't want anything to damage it. Okay? Are there still ways that your DNA can get damaged? Okay, like a virus, right? A virus can inject its DNA in. It can break your DNA and substitute itself in. Ultraviolet light, okay, can damage your DNA. Okay? Yeah, radiation of any kind, getting too many X-rays, okay, stuff like that can all damage DNA, right? That's why they can usually lead to what? Cancer, yeah. Okay, what cancer usually is, guys, is that the part of the DNA in your cell that tells the cell how to, this sounds terrible, how to kill itself, is damaged. Cells actually have a mechanism by which they will destroy themselves if they are malfunctioning. All right, they'll take one for the team. Okay, if they begin to malfunction, they will. If it's an animal cell, they'll rupture all the lysosomes inside the cell. Okay, what's inside the lysosomes? The digestive enzymes. It does. It eats itself. Okay, I mean, what are the enzymes eating? What you ate. What did you eat? Cells. Okay, I mean, it's designed to eat, to destroy cellular material. So an animal cell, if it realizes it's not working correctly, will rupture all the lysosomes and that will kill it. Okay, it will. It'll sacrifice itself. Okay, the problem is that one of the first things to go when a cell malfunctions is that mechanism. And so usually what happens then is the cell just starts dividing over and over and over again. Okay, and so what you get is a lump of cells that are rapidly dividing. Okay, that's what cancer is. Okay, that's what the tumor is. That's why people say, oh, you have a lump here, or a lump there. Okay, that lump is your own cells. That's why cancer is so bad. Your body doesn't recognize there's anything wrong. It doesn't attack those cells because they're you. Okay, but what happens is these cells keep dividing and they start taking all the nutrients from the healthy cells around them. And that's how cancer damages organs and things like that, is the cells divide out of control and they destroy the healthy cells as a result. Okay, so the solution to that is that if it's possible, the tumor is removed. Okay, and then usually you're treated with either radiation to kill the cells surrounding it, or chemotherapy, which does the same thing, kills all rapidly dividing cells. That's why people who are undergoing chemotherapy typically lose their hair. They'll sometimes develop ulcers. okay, and things like that, because those are the parts of your body where cells are rapidly dividing. The cells that make your hair, rapidly dividing cells. Cells that replace your stomach lining, rapidly dividing cells. All rapidly dividing cells are destroyed by chemotherapy in order to kill cancerous cells. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And usually the way it's called metastasizing. So usually what happens when cancer metastasizes is it gets into your lymph nodes, and then lymph goes everywhere. And so there's lymph nodes everywhere in your body, and the fluid that connects them can carry those cells from one lymph node to another. And then when that happens, that's bad. And that's usually what happens with breast cancer, because there are lots of lymph nodes in the mammary tissue. And so that's one that can metastasize very quickly. So that's why it's such a big concern. Yeah, like typically you don't, get like cancer in like your leg or your arm or something like that. And those are pretty rare forms of cancer to get in the bone or something. So usually you don't have to amputate something anymore. But yeah, they definitely want to go after the tumor itself. And usually if it's a small tumor, they won't go with chemo. They'll just irradiate the area around it, which basically means they just shine radiation, like give an X-ray to that little spot for quite a while to kill off all those cells, and then they make sure they get all the cancerous cells. Okay, I know it seems weird, right? Radiation causes cancer, but radiation cures cancer. Okay, it's a double-edged sword, right? You have to be mindful of where you use it. Okay, like if you're gonna do radiation, you have to make sure that the path of the radioactive material is not going to go through other organs. Okay, so if they were doing like on a lump in someone's breast, they wouldn't want to shine the radiation so that it went through that tumor and then through the lungs. Okay, like they would have to make sure that it goes sideways and doesn't attack anything else. It's a lot, very technical, okay, all of that stuff. All right, this big thing here in the middle, water vacuole. Okay, now the water vacuole, we said, works in conjunction with the cell wall, okay, to support the shape of the cell and the plant overall. Okay, if that water vacuole is emptied, then that pressure that it exerts against the cell wall goes away and the plant wilts. Okay, and I showed you a video of that the other day as well. Okay, so we want to make sure that the plant is well watered, so the water vacuoles are full. Okay, the water vacuole is not treated as a water storage. Okay, the plant doesn't go to it when it needs water. Okay, water moves out of it naturally if the plant becomes dehydrated. Okay, if the plant becomes dehydrated, the concentration of salts in the cytoplasm gets higher, and water moves naturally to areas where salt is highly concentrated. So it's naturally drawn out of the water vacuole and into the cytoplasm. It's not that the plant is like actively pulling its water reserves, they just naturally move out of there if the plant becomes dehydrated. All right, and then the membrane, there's a special membrane around that called the tonoplast. That's what that's pointing at. Okay, now we do have to add one label to each of the cells, and I forgot to do this on the animal cell, I think, yesterday. Okay, so we're just gonna make a line that points into right here, kind of what looks like empty space. Okay, is there empty space in the cell? What's it filled with? Cytoplasm, it's a fluid, okay? Right? And cytoplasm, the cell has to be filled with fluid because that's how diffusion works. Okay, and diffusion is what a cell uses to move stuff around the cell. If it wasn't filled with fluid, there'd be nothing to hold up all the organelles. They'd all just fall to the bottom of the cell if it was filled with air. Okay, so they're obviously filled with this fluid called cytoplasm. Okay, and cytoplasm facilitates diffusion. That is the movement of materials. Okay, and we'll add that also to the animal cell. Maybe right here is a good spot for that because there's nothing there. Okay, that's the cytoplasm there as well. Oh, did we didn't get the centrioles done the other day either, did we? I put the name on here, but I didn't get a chance to talk about them, did I? Okay, so the centrioles, okay, they have an important job in the animal cell as well, okay? And their role is that they help the cell to divide properly. Notice they're only in the animal cell, okay? There are no centrioles in the plant cell. The reason an animal cell needs them to help it with cell division and a plant cell doesn't is because a plant cell's shape isn't going to change. Okay? It's got that rigid shape. It's got the vacuole and the cell wall that keep its shape rigid. So when a cell is dividing, a plant cell anyway, it doesn't have to worry about its DNA getting moved around. Right? It'll just naturally move to one side or the other. But for an animal, okay, when an animal cell is dividing, it goes through, well, all cells go through a few stages. And so if here's my animal cell, okay, just before the cell is about to separate and divide into two, okay, all the DNA lines up across the middle here on what we call the metaphase plate. You're not going to need to know that till Bio 20, but that's what it's called. Okay, so all of your chromosomes are lined up along the middle here. Okay, each cell needs 2 copies of each. Okay, so you've got 46 chromosomes. All right, you got 23 from mom, you got 23 from dad. Each cell needs all of those. All right, so what happens is just as the cell is getting ready to divide, those centrioles migrate to the poles of the cell, 1 to each. Okay, and they send out these fibers that are like microfibers. They're like the cytoskeleton is made out of. Okay, and they grab onto their copies of each chromosome. Notice I'm only going to every other one here. Okay, the one at the top will grab the others. Okay, and then just before the cell is going to divide, these fibers pull the chromosomes apart. Okay, and they pull them into the right half. That way, each half of the cell gets all the DNA it's supposed to get. And that'll work even if right in the middle of all this, something happens and the cell's shape changes or it twists or does something weird because it doesn't have a cell wall and its shape is more flexible. Okay, that's why the plant cell doesn't need it. That's not going to happen to a plant cell, but it could happen to an animal cell. So it's got to have these ropes essentially that hold on to the chromosomes and make sure that they get where they're supposed to go. If they don't, one side will end up with too little DNA and the other side too much. Okay, both of those situations are bad. Okay, you need to have exactly the right amount of DNA. If you don't, really bad things can happen. Okay, most of the time, if an organism has more than 1 copy or too few copies, it just dies. Okay, so if we're talking about like when an egg and a sperm meet, if one or the other of those had a missing number or too much DNA, the egg could still be fertilized, but wouldn't survive very long. Okay, most of the time, if that happens, a woman wouldn't even realize she was pregnant. Okay, it would miscarry so quickly that she probably wouldn't even realize. There are a few disorders, however, that can lead to still the child being born. Okay, like Down syndrome, for example, is one. Okay, that's where the person has an extra copy of chromosome 21. Okay, it's called trisomy 21. So they have, instead of 2 copies of chromosome 21, they have 3 in every single cell in their body. Okay, does that lead to some pretty obvious and kind of serious problems for them? I mean, beyond the fact that yes, there's the kind of mental development problems that they will have, but there's also a lot of physical development problems. Okay, for people who have Down syndrome, there's a lot of issues related to their heart and their liver that can come along with having that, and so oftentimes they have a much shorter lifespan, unfortunately, than people that don't have trisomy 21. So having extra copies of something is bad. There are a lot of trisomies out there, and most of them, even if the child is actually born, they don't live very long. Okay, some of them, it's only a matter of hours. Okay, which is pretty sad, but that's unfortunately the way it goes. Okay, so having too much or too little DNA is very bad. Okay, the DNA is very important and we got to have the right amount of it. So centrioles are supposed to make that happen. Obviously, not everything is 100%. Okay, and so occasionally, sometimes something goes wrong with that. Okay, making sense there? All right. So next week, okay, I'm going to go over what all the parts of the cell do in detail, and we're going to start talking about cell transport as well. So Monday will be a lot of me talking and you listening, unfortunately. Okay, but that'll be the day I go over the bulk of it. Okay, then we'll be looking at doing another lab shortly after that, where we'll actually be looking for the individual parts of the cell and what they do. Okay? All right.